I stood up and walked out of the restaurant without a word, leaving my girlfriend there with her phone still glowing in her hand. You ever been in a relationship that felt effortlessly perfect, only to discover it was all part of a twisted game? What if I told you that my girlfriend, at our anniversary dinner, delivered a rehearsed breakup speech, word for word, from her best friend's manipulative playbook? But the real kicker? 6 months later, every single one of those friends watched their own lives and relationships implode, thanks to the exact same tactics they taught her. My name's Rowan, I'm 29, and I work in software development. I've never tolerated mind games, which is probably why what happened felt like such a profound betrayal when I finally saw it clearly. I met Leia at a birthday party about 2 years ago, and it was one of those rare, effortless connections. We talked for hours about everything that mattered. We had the same views on honesty and respect, and for the first 8 months, we had the kind of relationship where we didn't need to test each other because we already trusted each other. Then, her friends started appearing more in our conversations, in her decisions, in the way she suddenly questioned things that had never been issues before. Leia had 3 close friends from college, Tessa, Belle, and Nova. And the first time I met them, I got this uncomfortable feeling, but I ignored it because I wanted to give them a fair chance. Tessa constantly posted on social media about how women need to test their men to prove they're worthy, and she burned through 4 relationships in 2 years. Belle was quieter, but more dangerous. She'd make little comments that planted doubt where none existed. I later learned she'd convinced her previous boyfriend she was in danger and needed him to quit his career to protect her from threats that didn't exist. Nova treated relationships like science projects, always analyzing attachment styles and evolutionary psychology, talking about how men lose interest if they don't chase, and she kept spreadsheets rating her ex-boyfriend's behaviors on color-coded charts. When you love someone, you want to trust their judgment about people they've known for years. So, I convinced myself they couldn't be as bad as my instincts suggested. The first major warning came about 10 months into our relationship when Leia's parents invited us for Sunday dinner. I brought flowers and wine. We had a great meal, and everything was smooth until Leia mentioned her 3 friends would stop by for dessert. Her sister, Mara, shot Leia a look I couldn't interpret, but I just smiled. The moment Tessa, Belle, and Nova walked in, the atmosphere changed completely. Tessa asked how much money I made, which even Leia's father seemed uncomfortable with. And when I politely deflected, she pushed harder about salary ranges, because apparently Leia was used to a certain lifestyle, which wasn't even true. Belle kept bringing up her friend's boyfriend who did grand gestures like renting helicopters for anniversaries, making pointed comments about how some guys naturally know how to show love, while looking at me like I was failing. Nova asked about my attachment style, and when I said I didn't think in those terms, she immediately labeled me as avoidant, even though we'd just met. Leia's parents looked uncomfortable. Her dad changed the subject multiple times, and Mara excused herself upstairs, but Leia sat there nodding along like this was perfectly normal. Later, Mara pulled me aside and said something I should have listened to. She told me her sister's friends had sabotaged every previous relationship by convincing her that men need to constantly prove themselves, and I should be aware they were probably already working on her. I laughed it off, thinking she was being dramatic. Over the next few weeks, I noticed changes. Leia would cancel plans without explanations. She'd get weird about me talking to female coworkers, even though jealousy had never been her thing. She'd ask bizarre hypotheticals about whether I'd quit my job immediately if she needed me to. And these felt less like questions and more like tests with right and wrong answers. When I asked where this was coming from, she'd say her friends told her it was normal to need reassurance. And every time she mentioned them, I felt that knot in my stomach tighten. Then came the evening that made everything click. We planned a quiet night at her apartment, and I showed up with Thai food to find her on the couch staring at her phone, looking stressed. Throughout dinner, she kept glancing at it, and at one point, it buzzed and I caught a message from Nova that said something about not backing down. She started this conversation about whether we were really on the same page, using phrases that didn't sound like her, talking about needing someone who would fight for her, even though I'd supported her through everything that mattered. I asked what specifically she needed, and she couldn't give a straight answer. Just kept circling back to vague ideas about passion and effort that sounded copied from Instagram. Her phone rang. She ignored it. I saw it was Tessa calling, and I understood this wasn't about us. This was about whatever script her friends had given her. I told her I needed to go home, and she got upset, asking why I wasn't fighting right now, which felt like confirmation this was a test I didn't know I was taking. I left feeling like the woman I knew was being replaced by someone following instructions. The next morning, she sent an apology saying she'd been stressed, and I wanted to believe her. But then I was scrolling through my phone and saw an old voice message from Nova in a group chat from weeks ago that I'd never clicked on. I played it, and heard Nova's voice, crystal clear, saying, "You need to test him. Make him chase you. If he doesn't fight for it, then he was never really yours." And I could hear Tessa and Belle agreeing in the background about how every man needs to be tested. I sat there, listening on repeat, feeling like I'd been hit in the chest because suddenly everything made sense. The jealousy, the hypotheticals, the conversation where she'd been waiting for specific reactions. These three women had decided my relationship needed stress testing, and Leia had agreed to it. I called Mara, and she confirmed her sister's friends had been doing this for years, and Leia couldn't see it anymore. She genuinely thought this was what protecting herself looked like. I didn't confront Leia immediately, but I started watching the pattern. She'd text her friends before making decisions about us. She'd quote them in arguments. She'd second-guess her own feelings if they didn't match what the group thought. I realized I wasn't just dating Leia. I was dating a committee, and that committee had decided I needed to prove myself in ways that had nothing to do with actual love. I tried one honest conversation, asking if we were okay or if her friends were convincing her we weren't. And she got defensive immediately, said I was being paranoid. And when I mentioned the voice message, she went pale but tried to spin it as them being protective. That's when I knew this couldn't be fixed, because she'd chosen their version of reality over ours. So, I made a decision. I wasn't going to play along anymore. I wasn't going to jump through hoops or chase someone who was running away as part of a strategy. Our one-year anniversary was coming up in 2 weeks, and I had a feeling that's when they'd make their big move. I made a reservation at her favorite Italian restaurant for our anniversary, the same place where we'd had our third date, and where she'd told me she could see a future with me. And part of me hoped maybe being back there would snap her out of whatever trance her friends had put her in. I showed up 15 minutes early, got us a corner table with candles, ordered a bottle of wine. And when she walked in, I immediately knew something was off because she had that stressed look and her phone was already in her hand. She sat down, but within 5 minutes, she checked her phone 3 times, not even trying to hide it, just glancing down at the screen like she was waiting for instructions. I tried normal conversation, asked about her week, mentioned something funny from work, but she was barely listening, giving one-word answers while her thumb hovered over her screen. The waiter came, and she didn't even look at the menu, just ordered the first thing she saw, which was completely unlike her because she usually took forever deciding. Her phone buzzed. She immediately picked it up, read something, and I saw her face change, saw her take a deep breath like she was preparing for something, and I knew this was it. She put her phone face down but kept her hand near it. And then she launched into this speech that sounded completely rehearsed, talking about how she'd been thinking about our relationship and whether we were really compatible. The words coming out of her mouth didn't sound like her. She was using phrases like, "We've grown apart," and "I need someone who fights for me," and "I don't feel the passion anymore." And I sat there listening because I recognized every single one of those lines from the social media posts her friends constantly shared. She kept going, talking about needing space to figure out what she wanted, how maybe we'd moved too fast, how she wasn't sure I was as invested as she was. And the entire time she kept glancing at her phone like she was checking if she'd said the right things. I didn't interrupt, didn't argue, just watched this person I'd loved transform into a puppet, saying words someone else had written. When she finally stopped talking, she looked at me with this expectant expression like she was waiting for me to panic or beg or break down. And I realized this was the whole point. This was the test her friends had designed, and she was executing it exactly as planned. Her phone buzzed again. She couldn't help herself. She glanced at it, and I saw enough of the screen to catch Tessa's name and the words, "Stay strong. Don't give in." And something in me just went completely calm. I looked at her sitting there waiting for my reaction and I asked one simple question. I said, "Who told you to say all of this?" And I watched the color drain from her face. She started stammering that nobody told her anything, that these were her own thoughts. But her hand was shaking and her eyes kept darting to that phone. And we both knew she was lying. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't get emotional. Just told her, "If you want to leave, then leave. I'm not going to beg or chase or play whatever game your friends convinced you was necessary." She looked genuinely shocked, like the script in her head had said I would react completely differently. And she started backtracking immediately, saying she didn't actually want to break up. She just wanted to see if I cared enough to fight for us. I asked her why she would need to test whether I cared when I'd shown her every single day for a year that I did, and she didn't have an answer for that. Her phone started buzzing repeatedly, messages lighting up the screen, probably her friends panicking because this wasn't going according to plan. She reached for it, and I just stood up, pulled out my wallet, and put enough cash on the table to cover the bill and tip. She asked where I was going, and I told her, "I'm going home." I'm not interested in being tested like some kind of science experiment. When you decide to trust your own feelings instead of your friends' opinions, you know where to find me. I walked out of that restaurant and didn't look back. Didn't wait to see if she'd follow. Didn't give her the dramatic scene she'd been coached to expect. And the whole drive home, I felt this strange mix of sadness and relief because I finally understood the relationship had been over the moment. She'd chosen to listen to them instead of herself. My phone started blowing up before I even got home. Texts from her asking where I went, saying we needed to talk, that she'd made a mistake, that she didn't mean any of it. I didn't respond because what was there to say? She'd literally scripted our breakup based on her friend's advice and expected me to perform my role in their little drama. The texts got more frantic as the night went on. She was clearly panicking because the test hadn't worked the way it was supposed to. I was supposed to grovel, and she was supposed to feel powerful and wanted, but instead I just left and now she was sitting with the consequences. Around midnight, my phone rang and it was Mara. She sounded tired and frustrated when she told me she'd just spent 2 hours with her sister, who'd finally admitted the whole thing had been planned by Tessa, Belle, and Nova down to the exact words she was supposed to say. They'd convinced Leah this was the only way to know if I really loved her. That men need to be pushed to show their true feelings. That if I didn't fight through the fake breakup, then I was never serious about her anyway. Mara said Leah was devastated because she genuinely believed her friends were helping her, that they'd framed it as protecting her from getting hurt, and now she couldn't understand why I just walked away. Mara asked if I was planning to talk to her, and I said, honestly, I didn't know because how do you come back from someone testing your love like it's a game show? How do you trust someone who valued their friends' manipulation tactics over the relationship you'd actually built together? I went to bed that night feeling emptier than expected. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I was mourning what we'd had before her friends got involved. Before every interaction became a potential test, before I had to wonder if her words were actually hers or just scripts they'd given her. The next morning, I woke up to 47 unread messages from Leah. Each one more desperate than the last. And I finally responded with one text saying I needed space and time to figure out if this was something I could move past. She immediately started calling and I didn't answer because I knew if I heard her voice I might soften, might let her explain, might get pulled back into a situation where I'd always be wondering if she was listening to me or to them. Days turned into weeks and the messages kept coming. Apologies and explanations and promises that she'd cut off her friends. But I couldn't shake the image of her sitting across from me at that restaurant reading instructions off her phone while pretending to break my heart. 2 months after that restaurant disaster, I was finally starting to feel like myself again, hitting the gym regularly, focusing on work, and I'd made peace with the fact that sometimes loving someone isn't enough if they can't think for themselves. I'd blocked Leah after the 100th apology text because I needed to actually move forward, and the silence was healing. Then Mara called asking if we could grab coffee because she had updates and something in her tone told me this would be interesting. We met at a place near her apartment and she looked almost amused when she sat down and she started by telling me that all 3 of her sister's friends had completely destroyed their own relationships in the past 2 months using the exact same tactics they taught Leah. Tessa apparently started dating some guy from her gym and immediately went full control mode. Within 2 weeks, she was demanding his phone passwords and asking to check his location history. The guy gave her access, thinking it would calm her down. But that just made it worse because then Tessa started analyzing every single text message and questioning why he'd taken 15 minutes to respond to his mom or why he'd been at the grocery store for 45 minutes instead of 30. She created these elaborate loyalty tests, like having her friend text him pretending to be interested to see if he'd respond, or telling him she was going out of town, then showing up at his apartment to catch him doing something wrong. The guy lasted exactly 3 weeks before he told her he felt like he was being investigated and blocked her on everything. Now, Tessa was all over social media, posting long rants about how modern men can't handle a woman who knows her worth, completely oblivious to the fact that her standards were actually just paranoia with an Instagram filter on it. Belle's situation was even messier because she'd turned her toxicity into a full social problem. She'd met someone at a work conference, some accountant who seemed genuinely into her, and within a month, she'd convinced herself he was cheating despite zero evidence. She started showing up at his apartment unannounced at random times, claiming she just happened to be in the neighborhood at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. She'd go through his trash looking for receipts that might indicate he'd been somewhere with someone else. She accused him of having feelings for a female coworker based on nothing but the fact that the woman had liked one of his Facebook posts from 3 years ago. The guy tried to be understanding at first, but Belle kept escalating. She started asking mutual friends to spy on him, to report back if they saw him talking to any women, to basically build a surveillance network around this man who'd done absolutely nothing wrong. Her friends started distancing themselves because they realized how unhinged it had gotten. And the final straw came when Bell demanded he quit his job because there were too many women in his office. He told her she needed professional help, not a relationship, and walked away. The worst part was Bell immediately started telling everyone he'd been gaslighting her, that he'd been manipulative and emotionally abusive. And watching her rewrite history in real time to avoid accountability was disturbing. But Nova's karma was the most poetic because she'd literally tried to run the exact same script she'd written for Leia, word for word. She'd been dating this guy for about 2 months. Things seemed good and she decided it was time to test whether he was really committed. She took him to a nice restaurant, and halfway through dinner, she launched into this rehearsed speech about how she'd been thinking about their relationship and wasn't sure he was fighting for her enough. She used the same phrases, the same dramatic pauses, probably the same tone she'd coached Leia to use. The guy just looked at her, didn't get emotional, didn't argue, and said, "Okay, if that's how you feel, then I respect your decision. I hope you find what you're looking for." Then he paid for his half of the meal and left. Nova sat there completely shocked because the script in her head said he was supposed to panic, supposed to beg, supposed to prove he couldn't live without her. She waited for the desperate texts and calls that never came. She tried messaging him the next day and realized he'd blocked her number. She tried social media and found out he'd blocked her there, too. Here's where it gets better. Nova had been so confident this test would work that she'd told several people in their friend group about her plan beforehand, explaining her whole theory about how men need to chase and how this would show his true feelings. So when it backfired and he just walked away, everyone knew she deliberately tried to manipulate him and it had blown up in her face. The story spread through their social circle fast because it was such a perfect example of toxic dating advice meeting reality. People started questioning all of Nova's relationship theories, wondering how many other couples she'd sabotaged with her psychology experiments. And Nova went from being seen as the wise friend who understood men to being seen as the manipulative one who played games. The three of them started turning on each other after their individual disasters, which was inevitable because their entire friendship was built on shared toxicity. Tessa blamed Nova for giving her the advice about constant testing, saying if she just trusted her gut instead of following Nova's evolutionary psychology nonsense, she'd still have a boyfriend. Belle accused Tessa of being too aggressive with the loyalty tests, claiming her own approach of strategic doubt was more sophisticated and Tessa had just done it wrong. Nova insisted both of them had misunderstood her methods, that they'd taken her carefully researched strategies and turned them into blunt instruments. They had this massive falling out in a group chat that somehow got screenshotted and shared, where they were literally arguing about whose manipulation tactics were the most valid while completely missing the point that maybe the problem was manipulation itself. Their friendship group imploded within weeks. They stopped talking to each other, started subtweeting each other on social media, and the whole thing was just sad because they'd been so convinced they had relationships figured out, and now they were all alone, having driven away everyone who'd cared about them. Meanwhile, Leia had lost all three of her closest friends and was apparently going through a brutal realization that every relationship problem she'd ever had could be traced back to their advice. Mara said her sister had started going to therapy and was slowly understanding that healthy relationships aren't supposed to feel like psychological warfare. She tried reaching out to apologize to me a few times, but kept stopping herself because what do you even say? How do you apologize for choosing manipulation tactics over someone who actually loved you? I told Mara I appreciated the update, but I'd genuinely moved on and Leia needed to do the same. I'd learned something important through all of this. That my worth wasn't something that needed to be proven through tests or games or jumping through hoops someone else had set up. Real love doesn't require you to chase someone who's deliberately running away. And the healthiest thing I'd ever done was walk out of that restaurant instead of playing along with their script. The weeks turned into months, and I genuinely started enjoying my life again. I reconnected with friends I'd been neglecting, took on new projects at work that excited me, started dating casually without pressure, and I realized how much energy I'd been spending trying to decode Leia's behavior and anticipate her friend's next move. I ran into Leia once at a coffee shop about 5 months after everything ended, and she looked tired, smaller somehow, and she gave me this sad smile like she wanted to talk, but knew she'd lost that right. I nodded politely and kept walking because there was nothing left to say. She'd made her choices and I'd made mine. And sometimes people don't get second chances because the first chance revealed everything you needed to know. Looking back now, I can honestly say that breakup was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Not because I didn't love her. I absolutely did. But because it taught me that I'd rather be alone than be with someone who treats love like a game where you have to constantly prove yourself worthy. The worst part wasn't even the breakup itself. It was the realization that I'd been dating a committee instead of a person. That every decision and conversation had been filtered through 3 toxic people who saw relationships as power struggles instead of partnerships. 6 months later, I'm genuinely happy, genuinely at peace, and genuinely grateful that I walked away when I did, because staying would have meant accepting that being tested was just part of love. And I know now that real love doesn't work that way. The right person won't need her friends to script your breakup to see if you'll fight for her. She'll just know because you show her every single day through actions that actually matter. And anyone who tells you otherwise is probably selling you manipulation tactics disguised as relationship advice. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship because of outside interference or manipulative games? What's the biggest red flag you've ever ignored in a relationship? Share your stories and advice in the comments below.